What brought you to Detroit? Yeah. Let's start there.
Well, yeah, so I was out of a job in Cleveland. HK got sold. We're all gone. And I'm like, now what? And like I said, I was living at home, which wasn't too bad. Didn't have a lease or anything or an apartment. So it was time to get the tapes and the resume back out. And Dave Pash, who, like I said, when I went to Syracuse with, was a year above me in school. He was at WDFN, anchoring sports, and he was filling in. He was doing some Detroit Viper games on the radio. I think he was the voice of the Vipers for a little while. And I just talked to Dave, and I'm like, is there anything up at DFN for me? Because you're there. Right. And he said, yeah, actually, they're hiring. They're going to hire another sports anchor and reporter, get with the program director and the folks at Metro Networks. And so I drove up and I met with, I think his name was Glenn Oswald at Metro, Greg Henson at DFN, and they hired me. So I was working kind of for both, but I was really on DFN all the time. It was just how I was getting paid at the time. And so I started at WDFN in August of 96. I remember one of my first shifts was week 1, Lions at Vikings in 96. And that was when Detroit was leading for most of the game. And I was doing sports updates and scoreboards on the postgame show with Art Regner. You mentioned Art. And the Sarge, Steve Courtney. And Eric Lynch got the ball on the 1 yard line.
Oh, yeah.
Eric Lynch got the ball on the 1 yard line and fumbled, and the Lions lost. And I just remember Art. Art was in the studio. I was in this little update area. It was almost like a cubicle. And Art came out, and I said, hey, I know it's my first Lions game that I'm working, but why wasn't Barry Sanders getting the ball there? And Art said, Matthew. He was the only, nobody calls me Matthew outside of my mother and right. Art. And he goes, Matthew, Art's, moving around. He goes, welcome to Detroit. This is the Lions. Art gets on and starts screaming. Courtney's screaming. And I'm like, this is the greatest show I'll ever work on. These guys are hilarious. Just, and so that was my start and my maiden voyage at DFN. And I spent 13 years there. I was there the day that in 2009, the day of the Obama inauguration, where basically the then company, Clear Channel, destroyed the station. They fired everybody. Stoney, Wojo, Sean Belizean, Jamie Samuel, everybody. They all got fired. I didn't get fired. They kept me. I left a couple months later on my own, but I was there 13 years. What a ride it was. And it was really a terrific place to be. It was a lot of fun and great people, and the station really made a dent. It really did. But at the end, once the ticket started up and they were on FM and they had all the teams, eventually DFN kind of died.
Talk about the evolution of your role at DFN from the time you started to the time you left.
No, they hired me to be on air.
Okay.
So I started doing updates at night for the sports doctors. That was Art and Terry Foster. I worked weekends, pretty much worked almost every day. And then I was doing reporting. So I would go to games. Like I said, I think we had the Vipers broadcast. So there were a lot of nights they didn't need me to do sportscast. So I would go to a Wings game with a giant Marantz tape recorder and microphone, and I would get sound after the game and come back to the station, which was down on Woodbridge and Joseph Campo back there back in the day. And I would just load the audio in for the next morning. So either it was Dave at the time, Pash, or Jennifer Hammond had audio for the next day for their sportscast. So covered the Wings that first year that they won the Cup in 97. I was in Anaheim. I was in Philly. I was in St. Louis, all the road trips. The one thing that I'll say, the staff and the management, led by Henson, the program director, they really were big on, we got to be there. Our mic flag has to be in all the shots, and we've got to have the audio. We've got to have the ability for Regner's postgame show for me to call in with audio, with interviews. And we covered it right, man. That was the old days of doing it on the radio. I mean, back then, there was a lot of competition. We wanted to get the best stuff from the game and beat WWJ and beat WJR. And we did. I mean, DFN, maybe in the ratings and maybe because it was a small startup AM station, didn't show it. We weren't a juggernaut like WWJ or JR, but we had our niche, man, and we owned it. So I was always on air there. The only time I ever produced a show was when I worked at the Ticket for Valenti and Foster, and the then program director and the late legend Tom Bigby asked me, I need you to babysit these guys and run their show. I'm like, I'm not a producer. I'm an on-air guy. He goes, just go in there and helped them. And we actually had a great time together. So, but other than that, no, I was on air, and that morphed into Pistons pre and post games, which we pushed for when the Pistons got to WDFN. That was like a huge thing because DFN never had any of the teams. The teams were always either on JR or CBS, 950, 1270, whatever. So getting the teams was really, really big, or at least getting the Pistons was a real big deal. And I went right to Greg and said, can I do the pre and post game? Can we make the shows longer? Can we do hours after the games? And the Pistons were all for it too with Pete Skorich. And so I did that for 11 years. It was great.